Hi friends, I'm Les Mood, your host. Welcome to GreenTech Talks, where we have conversations that empower, inspire, and enroll. Today we're in beautiful Santa Barbara, the American Riviera, and we have a special guest with us, Eric Dresselhuys. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Les, for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
It's wonderful to be here. Always nice to travel and be in beautiful places like Santa Barbara.
Yeah, you can't beat Santa Barbara.
And the history too, as you mentioned as well, right? So
yeah, we were just talking about it just a week or so after Earth Day. The oil spill that happened back here in 1970 was really one of the catalytic events that got people to say, wait a minute, this is going the wrong way. We got to do something about it. And a year later, Earth Day happened, and we've been all hard at it ever since.
Yeah, absolutely. And with work you're doing is really important. And speaking of, what you're doing, which we'll get to, what are some of the things that people don't know about you, your colleagues, or maybe the world?
Well, I've been at this so long, it's hard to believe that anything isn't known at this point. But something that's maybe not as well known is I really grew up in a clean tech household long before that was the thing that people even talked about. My dad had worked in the water purification, filtration business, and so we absolutely grew up in one of those houses where turn off the lights and why are you leaving the water running, and really thinking deeply about conservation was a big part of it. And then as I was growing up, did things like taught wilderness survival in the Boy Scouts up in the Nicolet National Forest, where you go off with a group of kids for a week with nothing other than was on your back, and you start to really think deeply about how precious your resources are, because that's all you got, and you've got to live within those means. And so for me, in a lot of ways, this is not a place that I've come to as much as a place I've kind of always been.
It's really amazing, and you reference going way back to your childhood, and I always like to ask, where your journey began in the clean tech or green tech space, and for you, since you obviously go back with that mentality a ways back, where would you say there's a defining moment in your green tech career where we began?
Well, there was. So I kind of grew up in that household, and I went away from it for a long time. I went off to college. I didn't study environmental studies or anything. I was an economist. I got a job with Procter & Gamble and went off and did kind of the big corporate thing. And as we got into kind of the mid-90s, it seemed like everybody was quitting their perfectly good job to go off and work in .com something or other. And I wasn't a .com guy, but it did make me think about, is this what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? And I had an opportunity at that point to get involved with some guys who were working on very early precursor technology that became smart grid technology in 1995. And so got to the point where I said, this is the time in my life where I'm going to make the gut call, and I've been at it ever since.
Absolutely. So that's quite a journey. 95 is really early for the smart grid. What are you doing these days to advance green tech?
So currently I'm serving as CEO of a company called ESS Inc. ESS, is the name would imply, is an energy storage company. We are the leading provider of what's known as an iron reflux flow battery, which is long duration energy storage. So everybody probably knows about energy storage. It's a critical part of almost everything we're doing in decarbonization. But we work in a very specific category, which is how do you store energy for longer than the 2, 3, 4 hours that you can do today, and store energy for 8, 10, 12 hours or longer, which we think is going to be one of the critical pieces to making the energy transition happen.
Well, you've been at it a really long time. So in your time in the industry, what have you seen or been a part of as far as like a challenge and maybe a triumph associated with it?
Well, the challenges in our industry run aplenty. This is a difficult space to do work in, and the way I've kind of come to think about it is, as opposed to some other technology areas or things you could work on where you're really inventing something from whole cloth, in our energy tech world, we're almost always competing against something that's been around for 50 or 100 years and have had a lot of smart people really optimizing it. So you're coming in with a new thing that may be better in some ways, but you've got that incumbency burden of you got to be better than this thing that's been worked on for a long time. And so for me, the biggest part of my career was spent with a company I helped found called Silver Spring Networks, which was a smart grid company. And we suffered from that the early days. First off, really hard, technically hard problem to overcome. the idea of minimally viable product in the utility industry means it's 99.999% reliable with a 20-year life.
The standards and everything.
Yeah, right. And you got to meet all those standards, and you got to because this is what keeps the lights on. This is pretty serious stuff. It's not like a consumer app where you can just reboot the app every day, and the early adopters will get over it. So it took us a long time to get a product that chinned that bar, that met those technical requirements. But the satisfying part was we really helped, along with a lot of other people in the industry, define the whole idea of what a smart grid was and make those happen, make those come to life. And I look back, some of those systems were deployed in 2006 and 2007, are now humming along, have been expanded in their use, and are still a critical part of utility operations 15 years later, and humming along. And so you get great satisfaction out of that you can go turn the corner somewhere in a town far away and you see Silver Spring Network's name on the side of the building because we're still there helping to operate and optimize the grid.
I can only imagine that pride. I've done many projects and be like, oh, I've seen that. Or I know, my wife's like, I know. We've been by there a few times. So, but what kind of advice would you have for people, in your journey so far that you could share with the GreenTech community?
Well, I think the biggest struggle that I face, and I still face to this day, is trying to decide whether this is a marathon or a sprint, right? Because nothing seems to happen all that fast. You really have to show a lot of tenacity. You've got to have stick-to-itiveness. In this industry, because if you think you're going to drop in 3 months or 6 months, you're going to solve a big problem, well, the experience is that's not going to happen. But the flip side of that is I think we all need to show a lot more urgency towards the transition. So we think of this as a series of sprints, setting goals and pushing really hard to get to the next milestone to ensure that we keep moving things forward, because we just don't have the luxury of being able to say, we'll get to it later. This is something that'll happen, a decade or two down the line. And I think that's one of the challenges when we talk about climate goals and decarbonization goals. When people say, well, we'll get that by 2035 or 2040 or 2050, I worry that someone says, well, cool, that's somebody else's problem then, because that's a really long way off. Given the scale and the complexity of what we're trying to do, we have to start now. So find something you can be passionate about, find something that you can really put your whole self into, because you're going to need that to help you ride through what invariably are going to be, struggles and hardships and challenges along the way.
Absolutely. And, it's funny, our mutual friend Lee, he mentions, waiting till 2050 is really not acceptable, and that's some advice that he provides as well. And speaking of now and the urgency, and I like your series of sprints effort as well. That's really great. Speaking of now, I'd like to do this thought experiment. And in this thought experiment, we want to cast away all doubts and what is standing in the way of now, right? And really nail down maybe some of the solutions. So, what are some of the low-hanging fruits that professionals or just maybe average day people could bite into today to take advantage of?
Well, I think maybe this is a low-hanging fruit, or it's a slightly different way to look at it, but I would say don't worry about not having the whole plan as an excuse to not having any plan, right? We know that there are some good things we can get going on. We know that, if you look at the success that we've had deploying solar resources here in California is a great example. Have we solved the whole problem yet? We have not solved the whole problem yet, and there's a lot of things left to get done. But I'm sure glad that back a decade or more ago, we put the rules in place that allowed us to get started on that journey. So I would look at it, we look at energy storage, the business we're in, and the scale that we have to get moving on is so big that getting all fussed about whether we've found the perfect solution that's the ultimate thing forever and always is going to get in the way of our just getting started.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think, the go-get-'em attitude of California is really an example for not just the country, but for the world. And obviously we have a huge transformation or direction that we need to go. And speaking of huge, what are some of the bigger picture ideas or problems that we should really focus on and not ignore?
Well, I think the biggest one is, and you're seeing it happen now more regularly, which I find encouraging, is people are kind of doing the math. when you think about the scale of what we're trying to get done here, it's not just about decarbonizing the current electricity system. That would be hard. That would be a lot of work, right? But we're also going to take all of these cars and make them electric. We're going to take all the buildings, we're going to make them electric. On a global basis, we're going to take 800 million people who aren't connected to the grid, and we're going to get them, with reliable electricity service. And oh, by the way, the population is going to grow to 9 billion people. So if you took all of that, what we're really going to do is we're going to reinvent the electricity system that's 2.5 to 3 times the size of the current one, and it's going to be entirely carbon free. That's a big goal, right? And so the sheer scale of what we have to do when you break that down into its parts is the biggest challenge that we need policymakers, regulators, utility operators, big energy users. We need the whole community to come together to say, what's my part of getting that done?
So, speaking of community on the global community scale, what role can local communities or organizations, stakeholders, how can we come together? What role is played with community in the industry?
Well, I think community is hugely important here, and I like the way you phrased it. It really starts at the most local of levels, and so it's interesting, as you've seen, everything from condo associations and really small groups, neighborhood groups, getting together, on up to things like community solar programs coming together. There's a ton you can do within the kind of the technical, operational, economic bounds of technologies we have today to lower your carbon footprint, lower the cost of your energy, and make a contribution on a very localized level. The more that happens, I think people don't maybe appreciate how that bubbles up, through the system. And you can look at the community choice aggregators here in California as an example of that. That seemed like a policy that wasn't going to, catch on, or that people wouldn't care. It's I think been largely considered a big success. It's driven a ton of decarbonization. It's given people options and a way to participate. And so, if communities on a local level, on a state level, on a national level, as you roll that up, we have to give people an opportunity that's not so hard to execute for how can I do my part.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. I think participation is absolutely key. And would you say you've had in your work with ESS some community involvement that you could point to?
Well, we get community involvement in a couple of ways. Some of the projects that we're involved in, people are using long duration storage to create resilient microgrids. So that's an area where, and here in California, of course, as beautiful as it is right now, we know that we have this problem with drought and wildfires. And so that's created this problem of power safety shutoffs, as an example. So that creates a huge problem for a community on a very localized basis, because if your hospital, if your local medical care facility loses power, what are you going to do? Well, in the past, of course, we would have turned on a diesel generator, and nobody wants to do that anymore, not just from the pollution aspect, but it's also a safety hazard unto itself. So we have communities coming together to build microgrids to create energy resiliency on a localized basis. They use our battery, which is a entirely non-toxic US manufactured product. It doesn't start fires, it doesn't blow up in fires, so it's the right kind of technology to use for these. Tying that together with solar or micro wind on a localized basis and creating a 100% decarbonized, totally resilient energy system on a localized basis. And I got to tell you, when you talk to the people who are involved in that, they feel a level of ownership of how electricity and how their energy is produced that they're just never going to get from a big power plant that operates hundreds of miles away, that they've never seen and don't know how it works.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful description of what I would hope the future to be. But my question for you would be, as a result of what you're doing today and your efforts, what would you hope the world would look like that you leave behind?
Well, I hope that, I think within my lifetime, and, none of us know how long we have, but I'm feeling pretty good. So I think we could get to the point in the United States where we could have the energy system entirely decarbonized in my lifetime. I don't think that's an unrealistic goal at all. We have the means, both technologically and financially. I'd say that, from my view, we probably very specifically know how to implement about 85 to 90% of it. But over the next 20 years, if we can all align on the goal, we'll solve the last 10% problem.
Absolutely. And speaking of the last 10% or maybe the 99%, the general population, do you think it's possible to have an energy transition that's inclusive, that leaves no one behind? And if so, how?
Well, I think it is possible, but I think it's something we better be very, very conscious and very purposeful about implementing. And I'd say that not just on a community level, Les, I'd say it really on a global basis. There's a lot of scrutiny now coming into supply chains. We love the technologies that help us decarbonize our system here, but if that's built on the backs of cobalt that's mined in the People's Republic of the Congo, or Democratic Republic of the Congo, using child labor, that's not a sustainable way for things to go. And I have a lot of concern around how some of the even distributed energy resources on a localized basis have kind of moved subsidizations in a negative way towards disadvantaged communities, communities of color. All of those are very solvable problems, but they have to be done really thoughtfully. I think equity, energy equity, just like energy security, have to be front and center in the conversation of how we decarbonize the system, and I think the way you get there is to do it very thoughtfully and consciously up front. We can't be victims of the energy transition. We have to be kind of architects and builders of the energy transition.
Absolutely, and I agree, and I think the intentionality is important, as you indicate as well. Earlier you were bringing up now, and it sounds like what you're deploying is technology that's usable today for communities. So where can people find, ESS or get in contact and start the collaboration?
Probably the easiest way to get a hold of us is to come to the website, essinc.com. You can see more about the products, how they work, different use cases and applications that we've been involved in, and that list keeps growing. Of course, we're active on all the social medias, so you can go find us on LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram. So that's another way to follow the progress. We try to be really community building in what we're doing, not just with the things that we are doing as a company directly, but this kind of expanded community around us and what they're trying to accomplish, because this is such a big challenge that there's no way that ESS doesn't solve this problem. No one company solves this problem. We're going to solve it as a community, and it's going to be the most rewarding thing any of us do in our lives.
So thanks, Eric, for meeting me here and coming on GreenTech Talks. It's been a pleasure meeting with you, and look forward to some of the projects you're working on. I hope I can come and see some of them in California and tour some of them. When or where are some of the exciting projects that you're working on that we could check out sometime?
Well, we have a lot of exciting projects. We have some just down the road in San Diego. We have a few projects in Orange County. So some local things you could go see, but also really exciting projects happening around the world. In Europe, as you might expect, is a place where there's a lot of renewable penetration. Australia, New Zealand's a pretty good field trip to come on. And so we see this as a global movement and expect that we're going to be playing all over the world.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time. Appreciate it, and I'll definitely look forward to visiting some of those projects, especially Australia.
Thanks for having me. Keep doing what you're doing. We love the show.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you for joining us on GreenTech Talks, conversations that empower, inspire, and enroll. Make sure to like, comment, share, and follow, and we will see you soon.